Hello my friends and welcome to Sherman School. Here we're going to learn all about the iconic American M4 medium tank that served as the backbone of the Allied armed divisions during World War II. Specifically, we're going to learn how to easily and accurately identify the more than 24 variants of the Sherman that rolled off production lines over the course of the war and talk a little bit about what makes each of them special. If that sounds good to you, grab yourself a nice beverage, take a seat, and let's dive in. In today's class, we're talking all about the big stuff, Sherman tank hulls. Alright, now over the course of this series, we're going to be referring to a system that I've developed for Sherman tank identification called HEATS, H-E-A-T-S. Through this system, we'll look at 5 key areas of the tank to help us determine exactly which variant of the M4 we're looking at. For today's class, we're looking at the H in HEATS, which stands for hull. 2 important areas we're going to want to consider when it comes to the hull, the upper hull itself and the differential cover. And if you'd like to follow along at home with one of my new Sherman Spotter's Guide or Sherman Datasheet posters, you can pick one up today over at spruceandbrews.com or in the shop right down below this video. Not required, but if you're looking for a little extra reference material to keep at home, can be handy. In this video, we're going to cover our upper hulls. Over the course of the Sherman's production run, 3 different upper hull designs will be used by the various factories pumping out this tank across the United States. The cast hull, the composite hull, and the welded hull. First up, the cast hull. Now, the cast hull, as the name suggests, is made out of one massive single piece of steel. The Sherman tanks using these hulls were made exclusively by the Lima Locomotive Works in Ohio, the Pressed Steel Car Company in Pennsylvania and Illinois, and the Pacific Car Foundry Company in Washington. And the reason for that is because these facilities already had the means and wherewithal to produce a vehicle of this nature with the foundry and machining equipment that they already possessed. This huge single-piece upper hull was the original and primary choice for the designers of the Sherman for its perceived benefits of strength and integrity being made of a single, uninterrupted piece of steel, as well as the fact that it would inherently require less skilled welding and labor. This, however, will quickly prove to be untenable in light of the production numbers that will eventually be required of the Sherman. Identifying a cast hull Sherman is very easy. The upper hull is going to only have rounded edges. Soft hull cheeks tapering back towards the rear, no hard edges to be seen on that whole upper surface of the vehicle. Now, all cast hull Shermans are going to fall into the M4A1 family, and believe it or not, the M4A1 is actually the earliest production lineage of the Sherman. Not the M4, as you might expect. More on that in a minute. The first M4A1s roll off the lines at Lima Automotive in early 1942, and subvariants of this vehicle will serve in all theaters of the conflict until the very final days of the war. So, anytime you see a cast hull, you know right off the bat you're looking at some sort of M4A1. Easy, right? There are, however, several specific subvariants of the M4A1, but we'll learn how to ID those as we move through the HEATS system throughout this series. Alright. We know how to ID an M4A1. What about those welded hull vehicles? Now, the first welded hull Shermans that we're going to see start rolling off the pressed steel factories in the summer of 1942 as an expedient alternative to the M4A1. These first welded hull Shermans are pretty much mechanically identical to the M4A1s. Same power plants, same controls, same turrets, same guns, but they have welded upper hulls. And this was because even from its earliest days, it proved to be rather difficult to keep up with the demand producing these massive cast hulls for the M4A1. A welded hull Sherman, using pieces of rolled hardened steel, was determined to be an effective and acceptable alternative to the M4A1. There just weren't enough facilities in the United States that could produce single-pieced cast hulls at a fast enough rate, so the welded hull was going to have to do. The first welded hull Shermans will be M4s, and as mentioned, will be nearly identical to the M4A1s with the exception of the hull shape. Key identifiers for a welded hull Sherman: steel plate bow armor, steel plate sides, steel plate top, all welded together at hard corners. Now, as history will have it, the welded steel upper hull will go on to be the primary choice go forward for all subsequent variants of the M4 Sherman. The M4, the M4A2, the M4A3, and the M4A4 will all feature welded upper hulls. And as you might guess, just identifying the upper hull as being welded is not going to be enough information for us to figure out exactly which variant we're looking at in the field. So you're going to have to stick around for our next episode to get a little more information. Now, over the course of the welded hull Sherman's evolution, we will see one major change in the welded steel hull design. The earliest versions of these welded variants, the M4, M4A2, M4A3, M4A4, are all going to utilize a 56-degree angled welded bow plate. As later subvariants are produced with changes to the interior storage of the tank and the crew positions, that 56-degree welded hull is going to be reduced to a 47-degree angle. This does create a slightly less effective relative armor thickness as the angle is reduced, but it does increase the interior space of the vehicle. Now, if you look at the side profiles of a welded hull Sherman with both 56 and 47 degree bows, you can clearly see the difference. So if you see that sharper angled hull, you'll at least know that you're looking at an earlier subvariant of one of the welded hull Shermans. Now we know about our cast hull Shermans, the M4A1s, and about our welded hull Shermans, just about everybody else. But there is one other main hull variant of the Sherman, the composite hull Sherman, or the hybrid hull Sherman. The composite hull Sherman is exactly what it sounds like. They took part of a cast hull Sherman and part of a welded hull Sherman and stuck them together. Why? Well, cost, believe it or not. In the early days of Sherman production, it was actually more expensive to produce an all-welded hull Sherman than it was to produce a cast hull M4A1. In late 1942, the folks over at Chrysler came up with a possible solution. They suggest that they take the front piece of an M4A1 cast hull, just the bow section, and they mate that with the back half of a welded M4 hull. This will cut down on the need for all the welding around the driver's hoods of the M4 hulls, and facilities with smaller foundries will be able to produce that small section of the M4A1 cast bow rather than the whole hull as one piece. It's not a bad plan. So Chrysler and the American Locomotive Company knock out about 1,700 of these composite Shermans through 1943 and 1944, but eventually the need for the composite hull goes away altogether. As we'll learn in a later episode, changes in the Sherman's hatch design will eventually do away with the need for all that expensive welding of the driver hoods in the first place. Production switches to the 47 degree hull angle, and the rest is history. Identifying a composite hull M4, also quite straightforward. The front of the upper hull is going to be cast. It'll look just like the bow of an M4A1, but then we're going to see a big angled weld just above the first bogie. From that point on, the rest of the hull will be welded. Hard angled welds just like we see on a regular welded hull Sherman. So to recap, fully cast Shermans are our M4A1 family. Always, no exceptions. Fully welded hull Shermans can either be M4s, M4A2s, M4A3s, or M4A4s, and we're going to learn how to tell those apart as we continue through the series and work through the heats system. Composite hull Shermans are a literal combination of the two. Cast up front, welded out back. I tend to bucket composite Shermans with the M4A1s, but they can also be put with the M4s. They're simply a mixture of the two. So I hope you guys enjoyed the very first episode of Sherman School. Be sure to subscribe right here to Sprues and Brews Scale Modeling so you don't miss out on our next episode, where we're going to continue our work with the hull and check out 3 different differential covers that will provide us with some key clues for identifying the many variants of the Sherman tank. Once again, you can pick up your own Sherman Spotter's Guide or Sherman Data Sheet in the shop right below this video or over at spruesandbrews.com. And until next time, my friends, be well, happy building, cheers.